Welcome to NFL Fantasy Game Day presented by Geico. I am Marcus Grant, joined by Michael F. Florio. We are nice and cozy and warm here in our studio in Los Angeles. We are not digging out from snow, and for that, I am thankful this week.
Yeah, all these people online who are like, why can't they just shovel out and play in Buffalo? It's like, have you ever done, I don't like snow at all, but 6 feet, what are we doing?
6 feet of snow in some places there. And if you are out there, be safe, take care of yourselves, absolutely, and try to enjoy as much football as you can from the inside of your home. We got plenty to talk about on this show. Of course, you can send us your questions on Twitter while Twitter still exists at NFL Fantasy. We'll get to as many of them as we can here. The rest of them go to our pal Aaron Tan because he doesn't like Brussels sprouts. That's the whole thing. Just eat a vegetable and you'll get to get off of answering questions. In the meantime, let's take a look at some of the early game injuries of note. Lamar Jackson, who was a little bit sick this week, apparently will be active for the Ravens. Gus Edwards inactive as he continues to recover from multiple injuries. Josh Reynolds is out with a back issue. Kenny Golladay is active, as is Wan'Dale Robinson. Both of them have hamstring issues. Mark Andrews is active after missing some time with knee and shoulder injuries. And David Njoku is back after an absence because of an ankle issue. Looking at the late game injuries of note, Ezekiel Elliott is expected to play with a knee injury. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. Keenan Allen is questionable with a hamstring. Mike Williams expected to play with an ankle. Should mention that Allen is trending on the right side, but we'll see what happens. That game is on Sunday night. Devontae Adams dealing with an abdomen issue, but he is expected to play. Mentioned that the Browns and Bills are playing in Detroit because of the weather situation there in the Northeast. Cam Wolfe is on the scene there at Ford Field, and he filed this report.
No game here in Buffalo, which should help a lot of the players put up big stats, but it's still a game to watch for Nick Chubb against a Bills run defense that over the last 3 weeks has been bottom 5 in the NFL. So they'll lean on Chubb a bunch today. But one thing to watch, I talked to Amari Cooper this week who said he studied a lot of tape of Justin Jefferson going off for 193 yards against this Bills defense. And he saw a lot of things that he felt like he could exploit with the route running. And so watch out for Amari Cooper, who they've been talking all week about getting more targets to potentially have a big day. And on the Bills side, one thing they've been working on with Josh Allen to maybe help some of his recent struggles is getting the ball more on checkdowns to his running backs, his tight ends, and slot receivers. So it might be an opportunity for one of those guys to be in your starting lineup this week.
Appreciate it, Cam. Looking clean as always. He mentioned Amari Cooper, and I know we've talked a lot about the home road splits for Cooper. This is a neutral site game, so throwing all this other stuff out the window, how do we feel about Amari Cooper this week?
I think there's far too much upside to sit Amari Cooper this week. Not only have the Bills, you heard Cam say they've struggled against the run, their secondary hasn't been what many people think it has been in the last month. They're in the top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. Their top 2 corners are out today. Jordan Poyer is returning, their top safety, but they're also without their top linebacker, one of their top defensive linemen. So just a very banged up Bills defense. I say you start Nick Chubb for sure, and definitely Amari Cooper as well.
So Cooper very much in play this week against the Buffalo Bills. That game being indoors means the weather is not going to be a factor for either side offensively. Mark Andrews is expected back. I feel like it's a simple thing, right? Like if he plays, you play him just because we need tight ends at this point.
Yeah, that's the big thing too, is he's a tight end, so who are you going to play over him? But in the leagues that I have Mark Andrews, it wasn't even a consideration of sitting him. Like it was like, all right, Andrews is back, let's get him immediately back in our starting lineup.
Not even a hesitation to put Andrews back in there. Gus Edwards not likely to play. So this means probably a lot more work for Kenyon Drake. In a good situation, a good matchup for Kenyon Drake today. So we'll get him in lineups where we can as well for this one. That gets us to Waiver Wire, presented by KFC. Here's a look at some notable players who are available in more than half of NFL.com leagues. Daniel Jones, Isaiah Pacheco, the aforementioned Kenyon Drake is out there as well. Rondale Moore, who plays on Monday night in Mexico City. There's Paris Campbell, who has Matt Ryan back, thankfully for him. Van Jefferson is out there with a banged-up Rams offense. Cole Kmet, surprised that he's still out there in this many leagues. What's going on with that? Greg Dulcich, also available for those of you who are tight end needy. So on that list, or maybe not on that list. Who is your top waiver wire pick of the week? Are you going here or are you going off menu?
There's so many names there like Drake, Moore, Komet that I would advocate adding right now, but Paris Campbell is one of them as well. And Paris Campbell's played really well in games that have been started by Matt Ryan. In the last 3 of those, he has at least 9 targets, a touchdown, and over 18 fantasy points. He's doing it on over a quarter of a percent of the targets getting each week. And what I like about Campbell is he's not being used, like, he gets downfield shots at times, but they also use him as an extension of the run game with a lot of short, quick passes like you see here. So if Matt Ryan's under pressure today, which I really think he will be against this Eagles defense, I expect him to get the ball out quickly, which means a lot of Paris Campbell.
I like Paris Campbell this week. I also like Jerick McKinnon this week. And look, it's been hard figuring out the Chiefs running backs, and I do think there is a path for Isaiah Pacheco to have a nice game against the bad Charger run defense, but this game has the potential to be a track meet between the Chargers and the Chiefs, and McKinnon is the guy who gets the work in the passing game. They also like him as a pass protector. That's important when you have literally $500 million in quarterbacks standing behind there in the offense. You want to make sure he's going to be okay. So that means McKinnon can be on the field for 3 downs if necessary. We talk all the time about how much more valuable a target is than a carry. So this could be a week that Jerick McKinnon has some value, and maybe even long-term. And he's still available in a wide number of NFL.com leagues. Time now for 15 for 15, presented by Geico. Let's get to some must-starts across the fantasy football spectrum. At quarterback, who are your must-starts this week?
It's a lot harder to find must-start quarterbacks than it was a few weeks ago. Joe Burrow at Pittsburgh is always in play. Justin Herbert in a game where I think I'll have to throw a lot to keep up with Patrick Mahomes. Kirk Cousins in what could be a track meet against the Dallas Cowboys. And then Daniel Jones going up against the Detroit Lions. But you see Dak Prescott there as well. And remember a few weeks ago when it was like, oh, Cooper Rush is the Cowboys' best quarterback. How silly do you all feel now? Like, Dak Prescott is not only going out there and helping the Cowboys win games, he's making CeeDee Lamb even better than he was with Cooper Rush. Dalton Schultz is even better with Dak than he was with Cooper Rush. Everyone is better with Dak Prescott than they were with Cooper Rush. And Dak's been putting up good numbers. And what I like here is I said it could be a track meet in this game. The Vikings have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks over the last month. I'm very excited for this game for fantasy purposes.
The Prescott versus Cooper Rush conversation was pretty much just grist for the content mill. It was just like because we have extra time to fill in our days, so we needed something to argue about. Nobody really actually believed that. Moving on to the must-start running backs for the week. Cordell Patterson is back, and hopefully a full week and not a rainstorm will make him a little bit more viable against the Bears. Devin Singletary, now that this game is indoors, great matchup against the bad Browns run defense. Kenyon Drake, we've talked about, against the Carolina Panthers. And Brian Robinson going against maybe the worst run defense in the league in the Houston Texans. Let's go back up top and talk about David Montgomery. Part of this, I know that I'm sort of a mark for David Montgomery. I get it. Most people in the fantasy community are sort of off of him. There's nothing about him that's super exciting. He just kind of plods along, but he continues to be productive. And now with Khalil Herbert on injured reserve and out for at least the next month, this is a backfield that pretty much belongs to David Montgomery. I know the fantasy hipsters out there are talking about Treston Ebner, and that's cool, but for most people, Ebner's not going to get enough touches, and there's not enough depth in a lot of leagues to make it worth adding him. This is a great matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Montgomery's going to get a lot of the work. Yes, Justin Fields will run it too, but he looks like a really good option to have at your running back spot. Over to the wide receivers. Florio, who is on your must-start list?
Amon-Ra St. Brown because he is the sun god and you should play him every single week. Rondell Moore because he's been playing really well as of late. Going to talk more about him later. Amari Cooper we've already addressed. And then Terry McLaurin, who's just putting up good numbers with Taylor Heineke, who there's no quarterback controversy in Washington right now. And then at the top of the list, my guy Kadarius Toney going up against the Chargers today. It is National Kadarius Toney Day, everyone. It is happening. Look, Toney, we know what he can do when he gets the ball in his hand. He's a very dynamic player. We saw that last week. But now, Mecole Hardman is on IR. Juju Smith-Schuster is ruled out. MVS has been limited. And anyway, MVS is the cardio king of the week almost every single week because he does more for real-life purposes than he does for fantasy. So I think outside of Travis Kelce today, the Chiefs are really going to look to get the ball to their hands of their best playmaker, their most explosive playmaker in Kadarius Toney. I'm starting him everywhere I have him, which is a lot of leagues.
MVS with that incredible lung capacity from just running all of the time. Finally, we will get to the must-start tight ends of the week, and you want to talk about a tough list to come up with each and every week. But George Kittle, an absolute smash spot for him against the Cardinals this week. Cole Kmet, who I'm still scratching my head as to why he's available in so many leagues. Dalton Schultz, because I don't even care about the matchup with Dalton Schultz. I'm just happy that Dak is back because that means so much for his production. And Juwan Johnson, who just keeps finding a way to score touchdowns. I look for him to get some end-zone targets against the Rams. But right there, smack dab in the middle of this list, is Tyler Conklin, who came out of the gates quickly, kind of surprised a lot of us. We haven't talked about him that much in recent weeks. He's faded a little bit, but this is a good opportunity. The Patriots have not been spectacular against tight ends this year. And the last time these two teams played, Conklin went for 79 yards and a pair of touchdowns. He still is consistently targeted in this offense, and I know it's not super exciting to talk about a Zach Wilson passing game, but still, Tyler Conklin getting a whole lot of opportunities. So if you are of the type that is streaming tight ends, which is pretty much a lot of us, then Tyler Conklin really should be in some lineups this week. Normally, it is you all asking us the questions on Twitter at NFL Fantasy, but every once in a while, we like to ask you some questions. So our poll question for the week, which side are you taking first in the Thanksgiving fantasy draft? Is it mashed potatoes? Is it stuffing, mac and cheese, or the sweet potato casserole? I expect this is going to be a very tough poll this week.
For me, it's no questions. Like, not only is mashed potatoes my favorite side, it's one of my favorite foods. So, like, I'm going mashed potatoes all the way.
Mashed potatoes is pretty solid. I feel like stuffing I do enjoy, but I need some gravy on top of it, mac and cheese. You know, looking at this, it might be mashed potatoes.
Mac and cheese is a tough
Mac and cheese is, it's a tough out. So we'll see what happens. But you guys can go on Twitter and vote at NFL Fantasy. Let us know. Thanksgiving just a few days away. So what are you going to be loading your plate up with there? Time for a break. We got plenty more. We're just getting started on Fantasy Game Day. Matt Ryan back under center as the starting quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts. Helped them to a win last week against the Raiders. Can they do the same against the Eagles? A much different matchup, much tougher matchup there. And Zach Wilson, looking kind of chilly there, but Zach Wilson will try and see if he can heat things up for his offense. Speaking of heating up, we got burning questions coming up next on NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico.
I'm just excited right now, and all my possibilities. What's up, dog? I've been down for too long. I just want what's coming to me. I've been on my marathon. I've been on my long term. How can I get better? Just excited right now, and all my possibilities. I've been down for too long. I got just vibing right now.
Touchdown!
Can't be down for too long.
Hey, we're not getting off the gas.
Walk the dog, you Tony Pollard.
Just broke ankle. Man of the hour.
Pressured and down he goes.
I've been on this long climb, holding on myself.
We're still having fun. We're 8-1.
Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. I'm Marcus. He is Mike. Big one today between the Dallas Cowboys and the Minnesota Vikings, and Tom Pelissero is in Minnesota, and this is what he had to say about this one.
Big game today here in Minnesota between the Vikings and the Cowboys, and a bunch of injuries to monitor with potential fantasy implications. Let's start out in the Cowboys backfield, where Ezekiel Elliott is going to be back after missing 2 games because of his knee injury. He's going to be wearing a brace in this game, and my understanding is the plan going in is for Tony Pollard to get a little bit more in terms of touches as they ease Zeke back in. DeMarcus Lawrence also is going to be active for the Cowboys. That's important, of course, for their pass rush. On the Viking side of things, Zadarius Smith also is going to be active despite being limited in practice this week because of his knee issue. My understanding there is the Vikings have a short week coming up before a Thanksgiving game. They want to be smart with Smith. Look for him predominantly on pass rush downs. And as for superstar wide receiver Justin Jefferson, he's dealing with what I'm told is a mild turf toe injury. And I caught up with him at his locker on Friday, asked him how much you going to be restricted. He said, not at all.
Thank you, Tom. That's great news to hear about Justin Jefferson. Not that you weren't starting him anyway, but now you feel a little bit better just in case you were. That gets us to burning questions, and the first one does have to do with this Cowboys-Vikings game. We heard Ezekiel Elliott's going to be back. Still not 100%, and that Tony Pollard might get a lot of work. I'm going to ask you who has the edge here, but I guess the bigger question is, how confident are you starting Zeke versus starting Tony Pollard?
So with Tony Pollard, I'm confident to start him. I'm starting him in all the leagues that I have him in. Of course, if you have, a couple of other slam dunk options, sure, you can get away, but I don't think many people do this week. As for Zeke, much less confident with him because he's already the running back that kind of relies on volume to get his fantasy numbers. So if he's not getting a bunch of targets, if he's going to be now limited on the ground, we could see Zeke easily finishing in single digits. Like, I would play Kenyon Drake over him. I would play Tony Pollard over Zeke. Cordero Patterson's another name. So much more confident in Pollard than Zeke.
And you pointed this out earlier in the year. The floor for Zeke is a lot lower than it has been in past years because he is splitting those opportunities. And if it is that Pollard's going to get much more touches, that floor probably gets even lower for Ezekiel Elliott this week. Next one, there are a lot of players have had tough fantasy seasons. Rosters are starting to thin out because of injuries, buys, underperformance, all of that. How can you safeguard against scarcity right now at pretty much every position across fantasy football?
I think one thing you could do is you can go out and try to add someone that maybe is on bye or something like that. Like if Rachaad White, he was a name we were talking about on the waiver wire, but I know in some leagues he was picked up and then had to be dropped because of injuries or something like that. Go out with running backs. I say go out and get the top handcuffs on your roster if you can. Tight ends, it was a good tight end week. You would get a streamer there. Same thing with quarterbacks. Wide receiver is the tough one. It's like there's, at least in my leagues, there's not a whole lot of depth out there. So I think like take advantage of George Pickens, Paris Campbell, some of those waiver wire names we liked last week. But if they got picked up, you kind of just got to see what's out there.
This is the time of year where if you can start to think 2 or 3 weeks ahead, this is probably what you're going to do. And it's not always possible. I get that. But if you can look ahead and look at schedules, look past buys, because we're also at a point where most of the bye weeks are done. There's still a couple more out there, but most of them are done. So if you can look a couple weeks ahead, maybe add some players that have some good playoff schedules or just look like they are poised to make a run, I think you do that. But it's tough. Like if you think it's tough in your leagues, trust me, it's tough across the landscape. These fantasy streets, not very kind right now.
If you're a team that's comfortably in the playoffs, go out and trade for like a Jamar Chase or someone like that, because then you'll be like, all right, he's not playing now, but in 4 weeks when the playoffs start, he'll be healthy and I'll have him in my lineup.
There it is. Last burning question here: is it time to just move on from the Kansas City Chiefs backfield?
I don't think so. I thought that a couple weeks ago when it was all three of them getting involved and it was just like a headache. But with Clyde Edwards-Helaire really being cut out of this backfield the last 2 weeks, I think it's kind of straightforward. Like, Isaiah Pacheco is the ground guy. Jerick McKinnon is the guy they're going to use in the passing game. Neither one is more than like a flex option. You're never going to be feeling great about starting either one, I would imagine. But it doesn't mean that they're not useful pieces towards the back end of your fantasy bench.
Well, I said, we can figure our way through a two-headed backfield. It's a three-headed backfield that really becomes a problem. And that's what Kansas City was, as you mentioned. But now that we're down to just two guys, it appears, I think we can sort of buy back in on Kansas City a little bit. Of course, now that we say this, CEH is going to get like 15 touches this week, and we're going to be left super confused. Andy Reid. Next up on NFL Fantasy Game Day. Oh, wait, nope, not yet. No, let's go to the socials first before I'm so frustrated. I'm just trying to go to break so I can regroup. Colin has a question. Full PPR, David Njoku if he plays, Cordero Patterson, or Cole Kmet?
I have a partially similar decision like this in the league. I'm going Kmet over Njoku, but I would go Patterson over both of the tight ends there.
I think Patterson has a path to more touches there. I like all three of these players.
Same.
If you could figure out a way to get at least two of them in your lineup, I'd probably do that. But if you have to pick from one, Cordero Patterson is the guy for me there. Next one from 49ers Steve. This is not Steve from accounting. This is 49ers Steve. This is a completely different guy. Kittle or Schultz? I got Ayuk starting also in a PPR league.
So I love both of those tight ends this week. They were both in my start sit-em column as starts, but give me George Kittle in the best possible matchup. And you're a 49ers fan, Steve. You want to play George Kittle. Get him in your lineup.
Your soul, everything about your being is telling you to play George Kittle. Play George Kittle. The matchup is great. Doesn't matter that you have Ayuk, because here's the thing. There's going to be a couple pass catchers for the 49ers that go off, and I think there's a good chance it could be Kittle and Ayuk. But either way, even if it's only one of them, you still get at least one of them. So there it is.
Yeah.
All right, now we can take a break, right? Right. Okay, we're going to take a break right here. We got sleepers coming up. Nick Chubb, he's not a sleeper at all. He's just a guy you're straight up starting. And he's got the arms, he's got the guns out because they're not in the snow. They're in Buffalo. Meanwhile, it's a little bit flurries there in the Meadowlands, but I'm on Ross St. Brown. Maybe feeling good after his Trojans got a big win last night. We'll see if that carries over a little bit later. Talk about him and the Lions a little bit more on NFL Fantasy Game Day. Josh Allen and his Bills teammates trying to pull themselves out of a little bit of a slump right now. On the field, it has not been great for Buffalo. Fantasy-wise, things have been smooth as ever.
He has a handshake with every person on the individual handshake with every
Which is pretty impressive, actually. I mean, Cam Newton did that, I know, for a while, and it was just as impressive when Cam did it as when Josh Allen does.
I couldn't remember half of them.
It's amazing, right? Absolutely amazing. Jalen Hurts, speaking of amazing, has been pretty amazing all year long. The Eagles trying to get back on the good foot again against the the Indianapolis Colts. Did I say the Philadelphia Colts? No, that doesn't quite work. But Jalen Hurts has been a fantasy stud all season long. So we asked you on Twitter, which side are you taking in the Thanksgiving fantasy draft? And right now, mashed potatoes is a very narrow lead over mac and cheese. Stuffing hanging in there as well. Sweet potato casserole is playing for 2024, apparently. 2023, I guess. But, yeah, that one's pretty much a wrap for sweet potato casserole, but everybody else still hanging around. You can go and vote in that poll on Twitter at NFL Fantasy. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. He is Michael. I am Marcus. And you can keep sending us your questions at NFL Fantasy on Twitter, as long as the site has not yet imploded. So, let's get to a couple of them right now. Josh wants to know Mike Williams or Kadarius Toney in my flex. Now, I know how much you love Toney. I know you like Mike Williams. Who do you like more?
God, this is a tough one. I want to go. I think I'm going to go Kadarius Toney just because with Keenan potentially coming back as well, Williams coming back first team off of a high ankle injury, there's some risk there.
There is some risk there. I still think I might go Mike Williams. He's kind of more of a downfield threat in an offense that really is lacking them. So maybe he doesn't get as many targets as Toney, but I do think the chunk plays are potentially there. So we didn't help you at all. This one, flex Miles Sanders or Cortland Sutton? Sanders against the Eagles, Sutton against the Raiders.
You know what? I'm going to take a shot on Cortland Sutton here. I think Sanders has the safer floor, but Sutton is the higher upside, and I have him as a start in the start sit-em this week.
Well, especially with no Jerry Jeudy, no KJ Hamler. There aren't too many options there. It's pretty much Sutton and Greg Dulcich, kind of the only guys that I think have any real value in that Denver passing game. And also a new play caller, by the way. Clint Kubiak calling plays for the Broncos as Nathaniel Hackett has handed over those play calling duties. So we'll see if maybe that makes a difference with Russ and the rest of the Broncos offense there. Taking a look at some injuries of note, Lamar Jackson is active despite an illness during the week. Gus Edwards not active, though. Josh Reynolds out with a back issue. Giants should have a couple extra receivers to work with Kenny Golladay and Wan'Dale Robinson both active. Mark Andrews back on the field, which means he should be back in your lineup. And David Njoku also back after an ankle injury. Over to the late games. Ezekiel Elliott is expected to play, as Tom Pelissero told us, though it could be a heavy Tony Pollard game nonetheless. We just talked about Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. Williams expected to play. Allen saying he is going to play, but right now listed as questionable. And Devontae Adams had an abdomen issue, but he's expected to be on the field. So we saw Jalen Hurts getting loose as the Eagles get ready to take on the Indianapolis Colts, and James Palmer is there in Indy, and this is what he had to say.
The Philadelphia Eagles have one of the most complete offenses in all of football. One of the best run games, one of the best passing games, and they're going to be out, though, with one of the best tight ends in all of football in Dallas Goedert, who's now on IR. So how does that change things for Jalen Hurts? He has a lot of trust in Goedert. He is a vertical threat, but also in the screen game is where he's specifically very dangerous. And I'm told there are portions of this playbook they just can't use with Goedert not on the field. So who picks up the slack? Well, it could be Jalen Hurts actually running the football a little bit more than we've seen the last couple of weeks. That is always in the game plan, and it's something they could rely on more. Obviously, more targets are going to go to A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and Quez Watkins, but maybe Zach Pascal gets in there in that screen game a little bit more. I don't know if it's going to be the running backs catching the football out of the backfield more, because that's just something they haven't done a whole lot this entire season. It's going to be interesting to see how Jalen Hurts adjusts without one of his favorite targets in the lineup.
Thanks, James. And obviously losing Dallas Goedert, it's a big blow for fantasy managers because he had been a very consistent tight end all season long. But Palmer talking about there what this means for Jalen Hurts. I don't think this is going to scare you off of starting Jalen Hurts, but if you were going to pick somebody in the offense to kind of pick up the slack there, who do you think ends up getting a lot of that extra work?
Well, the fact that James said that it could just mean Jalen Hurts running even more, that is what fantasy managers want, because that raises his ceiling, it raises his floor. But I agree with what he said. I think we're going to get just more. I don't think there's a tight end on this roster who could do what Dallas Goedert can do. So I think it just means some more passing attempts to the wide receivers. Maybe we see like Kenny Gainwell a little bit more. He's a really good pass catcher out of the backfield. He could be used on short screens, but more Jalen Hurts running would only be a good thing for fantasy.
Only a good thing for fantasy managers. So it will be interesting to watch, and this will kind of give us an idea of what the Eagles offense can look like going forward, knowing that we're not going to have Dallas Goedert for at least the next 4 weeks, maybe longer depending on how his recovery goes. Time now for Fantasy Insurance, presented by Geico. The moves that can make or break your lineup. In just one word, sleepers, guys, that we are paying attention to this week. So who is somebody that we should be waking up and putting in our lineup right now?
Darius Slayton,
Yes.
because you saw the other two Giants receivers right now are dealing with a hamstring injury. Something about Giants receivers and hamstrings don't get along this season. But Kadarius Toney's been, I'm sorry, I just have him on the brain. Darius Slayton has been playing really well for the New York Giants. He's averaging over 12 fantasy points per game in the last 5 games. He has a touchdown in 2 of his last 3 weeks. And the Lions allow the 6th most passing yards per game to opposing offenses. Slayton is the type of receiver who, even if on limited volume, he is such a big play threat that he could have a nice game.
You know, once upon a time, you could have merged those 2 wide receivers and had Kadarius Slaytoni. I don't know why I just said that. My sleeper of the week is the New Orleans Saints defense, and we don't talk about sleeper defenses all that often, but this feels like a week to do that, and mostly because one thing we have been able to do with fantasy defenses this year has been target the Rams, which I know seems like a weird thing to say about the defending Super Bowl champion, but it has been true. They have been shuffling offensive linemen all year long because of continual injuries. No combination of linemen seems to have worked or been able to stay together for a while. So because of that, they're giving up a lot of sacks. Matthew Stafford under pressure has been turning the ball over a lot. The Rams just are struggling to consistently score points. And even though the Saints defensively have not been very good this year, this feels like an operation, or a situation rather, where they can operate and put up a whole lot of fantasy points for you. So if you're looking, and look, I'm streaming them in one of my leagues, so I'm not just saying it, I am actually living this life as well. So we'll see how this works out for me and for you also. Let's step away for just a moment, but as we do, let's look at Saquon Barkley, who is in the midst of the Saquon-assance, and looks like he has a very good matchup ahead of him today against the Detroit Lions at a very cold and maybe slightly snowy Meadowlands there in New Jersey. On the other side, this other part of the country, Jonathan Taylor, not snowy because they're going to be playing inside. We're going to be previewing, though, the running back matchup in Lions-Giants. That's coming up next on NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. Arthur Juan Brown getting ready to help lead his Eagles teammates into Indianapolis and try to get a win. Heard James Palmer saying maybe a few more targets coming his way with no Dallas Goedert, which would certainly be a welcome thing for a lot of fantasy managers out there. We'll see what happens with the Eagles and the Colts later on today. And McCorkle Jones getting ready for another start for the New England Patriots in their never-ending battle with the New York Metropolitans. We'll see how that works out as well. For NFL Fantasy Game Day, coming at you. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. I am Marcus. He is Mike. You can keep sending us your questions at NFL Fantasy. Let's get to a couple of them right here. This one coming from Cody, who wants to know Patterson or Kenyon Drake. I don't know why, but Patterson wasn't used much last week. Well, we sort of know why he wasn't used much last week.
I think it's because it was rainy conditions on a short week after he was dealing with the knee injury. I have Patterson as a start this week, but with Gus Edwards being inactive, I would actually pivot and play Kenyon Drake there.
I'd probably pick Kenyon Drake just because I think he gets more touches, but I think you really can't go wrong either way. I think Patterson's going to get a lot more work because it's not a short week, it's not raining, all that stuff. Next one, should I start MVS or Paris Campbell?
Come on. I've been on Paris Campbell all week. I've also been on Kadarius Toney all week. So I'm going to get away from the other Chiefs receiver and go with Paris Campbell.
I know people are trying to say MVS could be that guy today, but I think I'd rather take the shot on Paris Campbell. With Matt Ryan, he's been a whole lot better. All right, it's time for flex starts. Those guys that go in that flexible spot in your lineup, whether it's wide receiver, running back, maybe even a tight end in some cases. But for you, who was the top flex start in Week 11?
I'm going to stick with the short wide receiver theme here. I'm going to go with Rondale Moore of the Arizona Cardinals, who's playing on Monday night in Mexico City. It's going to be a fun game. You know you're going to be watching it. So get Rondale Moore in your starting lineup. He is at least 7 catches and 60 yards in 3 straight games. That's 13 PPR points right there. He's seen at least 8 targets in 4 of his last 5 games. He's top double digits in all of them, but his ceiling is even higher than that. And D-Hop is up in the air right now for this game. Marquise Brown is up in the air for this game. Zach Ertz is already done for the year, so I think Moore continues to see safe volume, and I think he puts up pretty good fantasy numbers this week as well.
Depending on how it goes, he might be the #1 wide receiver by default in Arizona. I'm going to go with a guy who once was a wide receiver, is now a running back. That's Antonio Gibson of the Washington Commanders. We've liked this Washington running game all week long, mostly because they're going against the Houston Texans. But the reason that I like Gibson as a flex is not only is he getting carries as a runner, more importantly, he's getting a lot of those targets there. J.D. McKissick still out. Now there's talk that he could be lost for the year as he kind of recovers from that neck injury. So that means we're going to see Gibson on the field in more of those passing downs. They're going to get him the football through the air. And in a game that could remain close, maybe you see the Commanders leading. I still think there's going to be a lot of work for Antonio Gibson in that one. That gets us to Who Scores, presented by DraftKings Sportsbook, where we project some guys that are going a little bit later on in the day. We're going to talk about the Lions and the Giants. And first up is Jamal Williams, because DraftKings has him projected to rush for 60.5 yards. Where do you have him?
I have him, normally I'm like, oh, let's keep going. I like to be kind with my projections, but 65 yards is exactly where I have him. 0 touchdowns, unfortunately, is exactly where I have him. And then I have to go down for this one.
No.
I have him at 8.5 fantasy points. I have him rushing for 65 yards. I have him getting 1 catch for 10 yards. And here's the thing about Jamal Williams. DeAndre Swift is not fully healthy, but he's still getting some touches. We saw Justin Jackson becoming a thing last week and getting more involved. Jamal Williams' usage in the passing game has kind of faded as of late, and the Giants have been really stingy against running backs this year. They don't allow a bunch of touchdowns, so I think this is more of a floor game for Jamal Williams than one of those high upside games.
Let's talk about the running back on the other side, and that is Saquon Barkley, and DraftKings has him projected at 100.5 rushing yards. I'm going to actually go down a little bit, not significantly. I'm going to put him at 95 yards. I will give him a touchdown. I think there's some catches in here as well. So we'll project him. We'll scroll up on this. We'll give him 25 fantasy points. So all in all, not a bad day for Saquon Barkley. Maybe he doesn't hit the century mark, but he's going to do a whole lot of other things. Look, Saquon has been great all year long. The Giants are certainly not afraid to feed him. The Lions' run defense is bad. I will say that maybe the reason he doesn't get as many rushing yards is because I think Daniel Jones is going to run the football as well, so maybe that takes a little bit off Saquon's plate, but I still think over and through it, it's going to be a pretty good game for Saquon today. Get in on the hottest sports action for your shot at cold, hard cash with DraftKings Sportsbook. Bet on your favorite sports all season long and gear up for football season. Right now, new customers can get a special offer when they sign up using promo code WHOSCORES. Ramondre Stevenson and the Patriots. Ramondre going sleeveless, even though it looks kind of chilly there in Foxborough, but he and the Patriots taking on their longtime nemesis in the New York Jets. See if it's still Stevenson. And Jacoby Brissett gets to play indoors, still wearing the hand warmer, even though they're playing there inside of Ford Field this week. We got Sunday Fun Day coming up next. Get ready to have some fun on Fantasy Game Day. Stephon Diggs, who, no surprise, one of the top wide receivers, not just in the NFL, but in fantasy football as well. We'll see what he can do against the Browns secondary. That game being moved, of course, from Buffalo to Detroit. Folks still digging out there in Buffalo, and everybody be safe there. Zach Wilson leading the Jets there into New England. This kind of a measuring stick game for the Jets, just because no matter how good it seems they are, the Patriots find a way to kind of keep them down. So we'll see whether or not Gang Green can finally get over on their longtime rivals there in Foxborough. Time for 15 minutes to kick off, presented by Geico. One last look at our early game injuries. Lamar Jackson is a go despite having an illness during the week. Gus Edwards is not a go, continues to recover from hamstring and knee issues. Josh Reynolds is out for the Lions. Kenny Golladay, Wan'Dale Robinson back for the Giants. It'll start either one of them at your own peril. Mark Andrews, though, should be started. He's active after missing a couple of weeks with knee and shoulder issues. David Njoku back in the lineup for the Cleveland Browns after an ankle issue. Welcome back to NFL Fantasy Game Day, presented by Geico. I'm Marcus Grant. This is Michael F. Florio, and it is time to answer some questions. We're going to go to NFL Fantasy on Twitter. We're going to pull out some more of your questions there. Hopefully, Aaron is answering the rest because he doesn't like green beans. Logan wants to know, start 2 here. Gabe Davis, Garrett Wilson, or Deebo Samuel? It's a good problem to have.
Yeah, it is. Surprising to say, is Gabe Davis to sit there? I know he brings such a high ceiling. Deebo, I think you start every week, even though it's been up and down for him. I like Garrett Wilson this week, though, in the matchup where I think the Jets will have to throw.
I think they'll have to throw the ball a lot, so I would say Gabe Davis, just because, yeah, the ceiling's potentially high, but the floor is also really low. I think those other 2 guys bring you more stable floors. Next one, picked up Justin Fields during Baltimore's bye week, so Lamar Jackson or Fields as the QB1. Got this question a lot this week between Jackson and Fields.
Yeah, I've been saying Justin Fields. I know Mark Andrews being back makes it even closer between the 2, but I'm just going to ride the hot hand that is Justin Fields in a fantastic matchup against the Falcons.
It's that Fields is hot for me, and it's also that I think he has a slightly better matchup going against Atlanta than the Ravens do going against the Carolina Panthers. So I would lean Justin Fields there, but these are seriously first world fantasy problems if you're deciding between Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields. You keep sending us your questions. We'll see if maybe we can sneak in a couple more, depending on how we go here at the end of the show. Otherwise, again, Aaron, get to work. Or eat some cabbage, one of the 2. Those are your options. Time for Sunday Fun Day. We don't have air horns, we have gobblers because we're just a few days away from Thanksgiving. So we're going to have kind of a Thanksgiving-themed edition of Sunday Fun Day here on this show. So let's start with the player that you're most thankful for this year.
I'll be a little bit of a homer here, but not the way you probably are thinking I'm going to say. I'm going to go with Stephon Diggs here, the guy we saw warming up coming into this block. And the thing is, I was super high on Stephon Diggs coming into the year. I was all about drafting him in the first round. I kept saying career year was going to be on tap for Stephon Diggs, and that is what he is on pace to do. And right now, he has 5 games with at least 24 fantasy points. That leads all receivers. Only Josh Allen has more. So I have a bunch of teams with Stephon Diggs on it, and he is carrying me to consideration to be in the bye discussion right now.
He's carrying me on a team where I don't have a whole lot of other pieces, and somehow I'm at 500 thanks a lot in large part to Stephon Diggs. But I'm going to say the player that I'm most thankful for is Tyler Lockett. I know it's a little bit down the list of guys that you might be thinking of, but mostly because of where I was able to draft Lockett. And I know early in the year in draft season, people were off Lockett, and I understood that. We didn't like the quarterback situation. We all thought the Seahawks were going to be awful, and so you saw Lockett falling in drafts, but every time I would come around, and it's the 7th, 8th, 9th round, and Tyler Lockett's still there, I was drafting him because I'm like, he's still a good football player, and it's turned out that it's worked out better than we ever could have imagined. So I ended up in a situation where I got a quality wide receiver early as my wide receiver 1, and I'm still able to roll out Tyler Lockett as a wide receiver 2, and he's provided dividends. So I'm very thankful that that worked out in my favor because I could have very easily swung and missed, but it's gone the other way. So thank you, Geno Smith, and thank you, Tyler Lockett. Let's go to some superlatives for the week. The top scorer today is going to be
the only player in the NFL whose name you can write out using just 2 emojis, CeeDee Lamb, because he's been playing really good football as of late, and then it's a good matchup against the Vikings. Right now, he has a 32% target share that leads the NFL, 3 touchdowns in his last 2 games, because we know that he can score touchdowns even though he only had 2 in his previous 14 games before that. Just start throwing him the ball in the red zone. Good things will happen. And then the Vikings allowed the 3rd most fantasy points per game to receivers this year, and they've allowed over 21 fantasy points to 5 different receivers in their last 4 games alone.
When Gen Zers see the CD emoji, do they know what it is?
They're like, what is that?
This shiny circle thing next to a sheep. I have no idea what's happening there. My top scorer this week, or at least today, is going to be Joe Burrow because he's got a good matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't really like the running game situation for Cincinnati in this one, but the pass game situation, I think, is cherry for the Bengals. I expect Joe Burrow to spread the ball around. I know we like guys like T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd, and maybe it's going to change a little bit now that TJ Watt is expected back, but I still do think Cincinnati is going to figure out how to throw the ball quickly and effectively and efficiently. So I like Joe Burrow to have a really big game against the Steelers today. Speaking of quarterbacks, that gets us to our must-start quarterback for the week, and which signal caller needs to be in lineups today?
Vanilla Vic.
Yes.
Daniel Jones, look. It's partially because of the buys and all of that, but it's also partially because Daniel Jones has been playing much better football than he gets credit for this year. He has at least 2 touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 games. He's been giving you around 18 fantasy points more often than not as of late. And then Lions, like, they allow the most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. They've allowed the top scoring quarterback in 2 of their last 3 games, and they also allow the second most rushing yards to quarterbacks, which is something that low-key Daniel Jones has been great at giving you production with his legs this year. Go ahead and get Daniel Jones in your starting lineup.
Very glad I'm starting him in a 2 QB league today. I feel very confident about that. I would also feel confident if I had Justin Herbert anywhere. I sadly don't, but this feels like a good Justin Herbert day. Here's the thing. He's playing good actual football. It hasn't translated into a lot of fantasy points, but that's because he just hasn't really had his weapons. He's been trying to make it work with Gerald Everett and Josh Palmer, and to his credit, he's certainly kept the Chargers close even when they weren't winning. But now, with him expecting to get Keenan Allen and Mike Williams back in, those are 2 big weapons in that passing game, and I think he's going to have to throw the football a lot just because the Chiefs have the ability to score a lot of points. So I think we're going to see Justin Herbert put up some of those big numbers like we were anticipating earlier in the season. Over to our March start running backs. Who do you like this week?
This one might be low-hanging fruit, but I just want to give him some love for being back and being the player that we thought he could be. Jonathan Taylor. And I know a lot of people might be like, well, he gets the Eagles this week. Doesn't that matchup scare you? The Eagles could have a big lead. They've been really good against stopping the run. Well, one, the Eagles defense hasn't been the same against the run since they lost Jordan Phillips, and he is still not back. I know they're trying to replace him. They signed every free agent who was over 300 pounds this week, but they're just learning the playbook and stuff. But what I really love is that Jonathan Taylor played 94% of the snaps last week. He's not leaving the field anymore with no Naheem Hines there, so even if they fall behind and have to start throwing the ball a whole bunch, that probably just means a bunch of dump-offs from Matt Ryan.
Very well could mean that. I do like the passing upside, receiving upside for Jonathan Taylor. I'm going to say Melgo. It makes me sad in my heart that I just said Melgo. But I do like his situation today against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raider defense has been bad all season long, and even though we have advised you to get away from the Broncos running backs, this is a situation where it's kind of become more of a 2-man backfield lately. I don't know how Chase Edmonds really figures into this situation, but Gordon, still the lead guy. Last week, he actually got a surprising number of targets as well. So if that continues, Melvin Gordon has the opportunity to put up a decent number. I don't think you're going to see a big blow-up number from him, but if you can get 12 to 15 points out of Melvin Gordon, I think you're going to be pretty happy with that kind of performance. Must-start wide receivers. Who do you like?
Amari Cooper, because I just want to reiterate, like, a lot has changed for Cooper throughout the week. Earlier in the week, I was like, I don't like him on the road in snow and bad weather. Now it's a neutral site. It's indoors, so it's a much better environment. Plus, the Bills still put up a lot of points on offense, but their defense isn't healthy, so they're giving up a lot of points on defense. That just means good things for people facing them in fantasy. Right now, in the last 2 weeks, they've allowed the 3rd most targets and rec yards to receivers. They're in the top 10 in most fantasy points allowed in the last month. Too much upside to get away from Amari Cooper here.
A lot of upside. We heard in a report earlier in this game, or this show, about how Amari Cooper could really ball out. I like Darnell Mooney in this one against the Atlanta Falcons. And I know we've talked a lot about the Bears and their running game because that's what they primarily want to do, but look, they're throwing it about 20 to 25 times a week, and you got half of those targets generally going to either Darnell Mooney or Cole Kmet. And this is a situation where it's a good matchup against a bad Atlanta defense. I think there's upside there for Mooney, even if he's not having to make acrobatic one-handed catches. I like him a whole lot this week. Must-start tight ends. This is sort of a hard situation to come with each and every week, but if you had to pick a must-start tight end, who would it be?
Dalton Schultz, because there was a stretch this season where, like, everyone was panicking about Dalton Schultz, and that was because of Cooper Rush, who is not better than Dak Prescott. But Dalton Schultz with Dak Prescott is averaging nearly 14 fantasy points per game. His low game on the year with Dak is 9.9 fantasy points, but just last week he went over 17, so such a safe floor and high ceiling for a tight end. And then since Dak returned in week 7, 36% of the red zone targets have gone to Dalton Schultz, so he could score. I think he does score a touchdown today in what could be a high-scoring matchup.
I like Isaiah Likely as a must-start tight end, and I know it seems a little bit tough to say that, especially knowing that Mark Andrews is going to play. But this is still a Ravens passing game that is missing some weapons there. Rashad Bateman is hurt. They just need somebody to catch the football. And I think we've seen how much they like Likely, an athletic guy who, yeah, he has tight end next to his name, but really could be almost a big receiver as well. So they kind of have two guys like that. You consider Mark Andrews is back and Isaiah Likely. So I still think there's a path for him to get some targets in this game against Carolina. So I would say this in deeper leagues. Look, if you're in a 10-team league, don't go out and start Isaiah Likely. But if you're in a deeper league, Isaiah Likely might be worth a flex option if he can fit into that slot for you. Must-start defense this week. Who do you have?
The Eagles defense, because if you watch that game on Monday night, you might be like, oh, what happened? They played so poorly. I don't know if I want to trust them. No. You ride out with the Eagles defense, not just this week, the rest of the year. Right now, they tied for the most sacks and fumbles forced in the NFL this year. They just added a whole bunch of reinforcements to that defensive line to help them against the run. And then the Colts rival the Rams for most sacks, for most turnovers, for most fantasy points allowed to opposing defenses. So not only is this a get-right game for the Eagles, it could be a huge blow-up game for their defense as well.
I just think if you got the Eagles, you could probably ride that defense all season long. For me, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. And I talked about Joe Burrow and the offense and what this could mean, but I also like what they can do defensively as well, because the Steelers' offense really has not shown a whole lot of signs of life. Kenny Pickett is turning the football over. They're giving up sacks. It's just been a mess for the Steelers offensively, and I think the Bengals can take advantage of that, maybe get some turnovers, get some quarterback takedowns, and put up a decent fantasy number for you. Let's get to what is normally our bold prediction, but this week, because it's Thanksgiving, it's our bountiful prediction. We're going to get bountiful. It's a cornucopia of fantasy goodness that we're giving you here. So what is your bountiful prediction for Week 11?
Dak Prescott's going to be like, every mom on Thanksgiving, just like throwing food on people's plates, because he's not going to throw just one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 touchdowns this week. Look, Dalton Schultz is going to catch one. CeeDee Lamb will get his. And Dak, I think, is just going to have a big blow-up game against this Vikings defense.
Well, that's going to fit, because if Dak Prescott is feeding, that means CeeDee Lamb is eating. And so my bountiful prediction is that CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson combine for at least 50 fantasy points. I mean, Justin Jefferson is Justin Jefferson. It speaks for itself. And I guess I could say the same thing about CeeDee Lamb as well. Got a good matchup against that Vikings secondary, and I think he's going to have a big game today. Last look at our poll. Which side are you taking in the Thanksgiving fantasy draft? And your winner is mashed potatoes, just edging out their mac and cheese. That'll do it for this edition of Fantasy Game Day. We'll see you next week, everybody.
And now on 3rd down, Fields will yank it, and there's room to run for Fields. Oh, baby. Turn it on the speed, and he'll beat him to the goal line for the touchdown.
Zacchaeus in motion. Here's Patterson, reaches across. His second touchdown today.
It's 3rd and 8. Down the field they go, and he's got a second touchdown of the game. A.J. Brown, unstoppable so far.
Second down, so there's a big hole. He's off to the races. Chased by Harmon, chased by Webb. And you can kiss him goodbye.
2nd and 17. Allen has time. Intercepted. Sauce Gardner's got it. And the Jets are in business inside the Buffalo 20.
Jones throwing, end zone. Oh, what a grab by Ramondre Stevenson for the touchdown. Oh, that really was a nice grab. Just such soft hands, running an option route.
As Heineke avoids pressure and heaves it deep. Samuel, the officials down there, and Samuel makes the catch. There were 3 Vikings and an official.
Mills is there. Mills scrambling, eyes downfield, throws, and it is caught for the touchdown by Chris Moore.
Wolford to the end zone. It is caught for a touchdown by Van Jefferson for John Wolford. That's the first touchdown pass of his NFL career. It's Kamara with room to roam. Here he goes. He breaks the tackle coming in from Harmon and scores for the 3rd time today.
This is Chubb breaking free up the sideline to the end zone for the touchdown.
He's your one guy that's capable of getting you an explosive play that you could probably count on.
For Allen and more. Josh Allen, sideline, touchdown. Josh Allen does it himself.
36 yards. Walker on first down, moving to his left. And now Walker fires downfield, looking for DJ Moore. Oh my God! Makes a diving catch for a Panthers touchdown.
Jackson surveys, under pressure. Throws, and it's in the back of the end zone. Hold in there by Likely.
4th and a long one. Takes the snap, fakes the give, rolls, throws back against his body. Intercepted by the Lions. Aiden Hutchinson with a pick. Down into the end zone he goes for a touchback.
Rush coming, forced to throw, coming back for it, breaking a tackle. Slayton, catch and run, down the sideline. Slayton, twirling. Darius Slayton goes the distance. There goes Carr, caught. Adams, hold on. Here he goes, room to roam. Touchdown.
Wilson looking for Jalen Virgil. Wide open, and he's gone. First NFL catch is a touchdown. Mixon motoring around the edge. Mixon into the end zone. His 4th rushing touchdown of the day.
And Pickett end zone shot, and Pickens caught it. Inbounds, yes. Touchdown.
Back to throw. Deep left, Lamb 10, 5, walking in. Touchdown, CeeDee Lamb. Cousins back to throw on 4th and 18. He wants Jefferson, climbs the ladder. Oh my goodness! Justin Jefferson pulled it in. The catch of his life keeps the Vikings' hopes alive.